I have to remember now to start. Okay. All right. So we are going to be in Daniel 2 today. So we went over Daniel 1 last week, and we talked a lot about kind of the history of the backdrop of Daniel. So we talked about the 3 sieges of Nebuchadnezzar, and we kind of gave you a bigger picture of why Daniel is where he is in Babylon. All right, so we are going to go into chapter 2, and there is a very unique thing that happens in chapter 2. So for all of chapter 1, and then for the first couple of verses of chapter 2, Daniel is writing in the Hebrew language. Okay, so he's explaining what happened to him in the Hebrew language. And then in the first couple of verses of chapter 2, he actually switches languages. He switches to Aramaic, and we're going to see that in the text. And all the way until the end of chapter 7, he stays in the Aramaic language. And what we see is that God through Daniel is speaking to the Babylonians. So he's speaking about what's happening in Babylon. He's speaking about Babylon. And so he stays in that Aramaic language. But then when we get to chapter 8 and the rest of it, he switches back to Hebrew, because God gives him visions about what is going to happen to Israel. And so he switches back to Hebrew in order to speak to the Hebrews. Okay, so it's a pretty unique thing that we don't see in other books of the Bible. Other books are just written in one language or the other. But Daniel purposely switches languages here on us. All right, so let's go ahead and start in Daniel 2, verse 1. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, before we get any further, the 2nd year, we have some contradictory about what that means, because we do not know if Daniel was talking about Babylonian years, because the oddballs of the Babylonians, they did not count the 1st year of a king's reign as year 1. They waited until they completed a year, and then they started counting their reigns. So this could be Nebuchadnezzar's 3rd year technically as king, or Daniel could be talking in the Hebrew language. The Hebrews started, the first day you started as king was your day 1 of reign. So we're not sure where Daniel is pointing us to. But this either happens while Daniel is still being tested through his 3 years, or if this is year 3 of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, then this happens afterward. Okay? So we're not quite sure, but somewhere in that time period is where we are. Okay? So now remember, Daniel is how old roughly when he goes to Babylon?
14.
He's roughly 14-ish, our best guess. So if we add anywhere from 2 to 3 years, he's still only 16 or 17. Okay, so we're still talking about a really young man here. Okay, so keep that in your mind while this is happening. All right, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Okay, so obviously we all have dreams, we all have nightmares, we all have things that keep us up in the middle of the night, but something about this dream was very different, and Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that this is a very unusual and significant dream that happens to him. Okay, so then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dream. Okay. So he calls everybody, all of his different wise men in the middle of the night. He tells them to come to him, and he's going to tell them about his dream. So they all came and stood before the king. Verse 3, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Okay, so we don't know if Nebuchadnezzar didn't remember his own dream, or if he's asking for the interpretation of the dream there. But he is curious about this dream, and he wants to challenge his people. All right, so we know that there's something going on, and so he has called these people forward. And then in verse 4, we have our switch. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic. Okay, so there's our switch. From here forward, everything else is going to be in Aramaic, all the way to the end of chapter 7. And they said to him, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid to ruins. Okay, so this is pretty significant event that happens here. The king is asking them to tell him his dream in detail and the interpretation of it. Okay? And he tells them that if they can't, they are going to be torn limb from limb. Now, we have from the Babylonian records what this actually means in great detail. So they would go out to a forest, and they would find 4 trees that were kind of near each other. And they would bend those trees down and tie them down. And then they would take the victim, and they would tie each of their arms and their legs to the 4 trees, and then they would cut the rope, and so the 4 trees would go back to their standing position, pulling the body apart in 4 parts. That's what Nebuchadnezzar threatened them with, okay? And then after that happened, they'd go to their house and burn their house down and all the possessions inside. Okay, so we have the Babylonian record of what the king was threatening them with. Okay, so he is threatening with this. This is what's going to happen to you if you do not tell me my dream and its interpretation. Okay, but they said in verse 6, "But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you will receive gifts from me and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation." Okay, so he's telling them, listen, either you will be torn limb from limb, or I'm going to reward you. Okay, so we have this set up here. And they answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show you its interpretation." So they said, "If you tell us the dream, we'll tell you what it means." And then King Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you shall show me its interpretation." Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar is putting them to the test. He wants to know if they're the real deal. Now, remember, he's a brand new king. He's only been reigning for a couple of years. So these wise men are not his wise men. These are his father's wise men. So when this dream comes about, he decides, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to test these wise men, and I'm going to figure out who's really real here, okay? So King Nebuchadnezzar here is very, very intelligent, very wise man. He's smart, okay? He is going to clean house because he knows that false religion is absolutely worthless, okay? These people are absolutely worthless to him if they can't talk to their gods, if they cannot interpret dreams, if they cannot tell him the dream, they're absolutely worthless to him, and he's going to clean house, okay? So, verse 10 says, "And the Chaldean answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or any enchanter or any Chaldeans." Okay, so remember, they're next on the line. Okay, they're trying to convince the king that his request is ridiculous. Meanwhile, they're trying to not tell the king how inept they are because they cannot do this. So they're telling the king, listen, we're not going to be able to do this. But they're trying to make him change his mind, okay? The thing that the king has asked is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So we have truth out of the mouths of the magicians, okay? They told him, there is not anyone walking among us who can do this feat. Only the gods, only the divine can do this. Now remember, what is the whole job of all of these people? This whole group of people, what is their sole purpose for living?
Do what the king says.
Their whole job is to talk to the gods. They are enchanters, they're magicians, they're astrologers. That's what they do all day long, is figure out communication between the divine and the normal planes. So they're telling him it's impossible. So they're telling him we can't do our job. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar has every right here to test them because this is their job. This is what they're supposed to be doing. But we have truth that comes out. No one who dwells with flesh can do this. Okay? So verse 12 says, because of this, the king was angry and very furious. Okay, so he is ticked off. He's done with these magicians. He commanded that all of the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Guess who that's going to include? That's going to include our Daniel and all of his friends. Okay, so now we're going to involve Daniel and all of his friends in this. 13 says, so the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Eric. Okay, the captain of the king's guard who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. Okay, so the army is ready. Okay, and the army goes looking for all the wise men of Babylon. They're going to get ready to kill everybody because they couldn't do it. So then Daniel replied and told him, he declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Okay, so Daniel has the right question here. Why are you dragging us out of bed in the middle of the night to kill us all? What's happened? What's going on here? Then Arioch made the matter made known to Daniel. So he tells him everything that's happened. Okay, the king's had a dream. He called the magicians. They couldn't interpret it. Now everybody's got to die. So Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he may show the interpretation of the king. So Daniel asked for time. Okay, he says, I can do this, but I need time. Okay, so then Daniel, he went back to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. Okay, and he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar has collected them all together. Whatever happens to the wise men of Babylon is going to happen to Daniel and his companions. Okay, so they go into a prayer meeting. They beg God for mercy. Please show us what to do. Verse 19 says, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Okay, so we don't know if this is a vision. We don't know if this is a dream. We don't know exactly how Daniel receives this, but God answers their prayer. Okay, so he shows Daniel not only the vision and the dream, but he also shows him the interpretation. Okay, then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And I love that we get this character of Daniel here, because if my neck was on the line and I'm praying to God for the answer, and the answer comes, my next step would be straight to the throne room of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because we don't have time. This is happening now. All of these people's lives are on the line. I would go running straight to the king's throne room. And Daniel doesn't. He stops. He has the dream. He has the interpretation. He has the key to save everyone. And he stops. And he blesses the God of heaven. And then he records his prayer here. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Now, I'm going to tell you, in this type of year, when it's an election year, this is my favorite verse to pray, okay? Because it is very difficult for us to control the authorities set up over us, but we know the one who removes kings and sets up kings. And so this is my favorite verse to pray for this time of year. God, you are going to remove kings and set up kings however you want. Help me be okay with your choice. Okay? All right, verse 22, he continues on. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my father, okay? Remember, Daniel remembers who he is. God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Okay? So he stops in the middle of all of this, and he absolutely blesses the Lord for answering him. Now, does Daniel know what's going to happen when he goes and tells the king the interpretation? No, he has no idea. He could give the king the interpretation, the king could still go through with his threat. He could still kill them all because he doesn't like the interpretation. Daniel has the interpretation. He knows what's going to happen, but he doesn't know how the king's going to respond to it. Okay? So he takes this moment to bless the Lord. Okay? All right, so 24 says, therefore Daniel went into Arioch. Okay? So he goes to the captain of the guard, and he tells him who the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Okay? So he goes directly to the source. The person who has the blade at everybody's neck, he goes to him. And he says, bring me before the king. I've got the interpretation. Okay? Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said this to him. Wait a minute. I have found. All right, Arioch, wait, what? I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. So we get a little sneak peek of the pride of Babylon. This becomes very important later on. The Babylonians are very, very prideful people, and it will be to Nebuchadnezzar's downfall. Okay, so we get a little sample here. So Arok says, I have found. Okay, he's hoping that he's going to get in the good graces of the king, right? I brought you a man, and he's going to tell you the interpretation. So the king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, that's who he knew him as, you are able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation. Remember, he wants both sides. He wants the dream and the interpretation. And Daniel answered the king, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. Okay, so he's speaking truth, but remember, he's speaking truth in front of all of these people. Okay, none of these guys could do it, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the last days. Okay, so he is giving all credit to God. Remember, in mirroring what Arok just did, saying, I have found, Daniel's going, God has given us the interpretation. Okay, and he told King Nebuchadnezzar that these are events that will happen later, after Nebuchadnezzar, the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you laid in the bed are these. Okay, so he's going to tell them the vision first. To you, O king, as you laid in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than any living thing, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king and that you may know the thoughts of your head. Okay, so he's saying it's not that I'm smarter than all of these guys up here. Okay, he's saying it is all by God who's given me wisdom and revelation. Okay, so that Nebuchadnezzar would know what's about to happen. Okay, so he tells them in verse 31, he is going to tell them the dream first. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty in an exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. Okay, so Daniel's confirming that this was a pretty frightening image. This was massive, bright, and frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, and its chest and arms of silver, and its middle and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Okay, so he's going to tell them, you saw a great and mighty image, a statue. Now please forgive my statue drawing abilities, because we're going to have to make it more than a stick figure. All right, so we have a head, and the head is made out of gold. Okay, we're going to give him a crown. All right, so the head is made out of gold. His chest and his arms are made out of silver. Okay, his chest and his arms are made out of silver. And his middle here and his thighs are made out of bronze. Okay, and then he has legs of iron. Okay, so 2 legs. These are both out of iron. And then he has feet. And we're actually going to get to see his little toesies. And he has feet that are partly of clay and partly of iron. Okay? So this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. He saw this huge statue that was bright and shining and absolutely terrifying, but it's made up of all these different materials. Okay, and there's division that happens. We have gold, then we have silver, and then we have bronze, then we have iron, and then we have iron and clay mixed together. So Nebuchadnezzar sees this, and it terrifies him. He has no idea what this means. Okay, this huge statue that he sees. Okay, let's pick up in verse 34. And as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay. So what do we know is a stone that is not cut by human hands? It has to come from where? Somewhere else, right? This is an asteroid. This is a meteor. This is a comet that no man has cut out, but it strikes, not in the center, it strikes down here at the feet, okay? And it strikes so hard that this image just absolutely crumbles into pieces. It's just a pile of pieces, okay? As you looked, a stone that was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all were broken into pieces and became like shaft of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that there was not a trace to be found. Okay? So the wind comes in and just blows this all to dust. Just blows it all away. Okay? But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. Okay? So this stone becomes a great mountain, and it fills the whole earth. And Daniel says, this was the dream. Now we will tell you the king of its interpretation. So Nebuchadnezzar sees all of this. He sees this image. He sees this rock just fly out of nowhere and break the statue into pieces, and it blow away with the wind. But then this rock becomes this huge mountain, and it fills the whole earth. And King Nebuchadnezzar wakes up going, what does that mean? What in the world is going on? Okay? So Daniel's going to tell the interpretation of the dream. That was the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation thereof. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of men, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Okay? So he tells Nebuchadnezzar probably what Nebuchadnezzar wants to hear. You are the gold. Okay? So this is Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Okay? So this represents Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you. So this is showing inferiority. So silver is less than gold. So we have a second kingdom that's going to arise. And yet a third kingdom of bronze. So a third kingdom is going to rise, who shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crashes, it shall break and crush all things. And as you saw the feet, okay, and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. So we see these different divisions here. Okay? But some of their firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. So as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they shall mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Okay? So Daniel is focusing down here on the feet. And he tells them that it looks strong. Iron looks strong, but when you mix it with clay, it becomes very brittle. Okay? And that it looks like it's this whole one nation, but it's really all broken up. Okay? Even though it's all mixing together, like in marriage, it's not going to stand firm. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall that kingdom be left to any other people. It shall break into pieces all the kings and bring them to their end, and it shall stand forever. So now he's going to talk about this rock that comes down and hits the feet and absolutely destroys it. And then this kingdom is an eternal kingdom. Okay? It doesn't belong to anybody. It is an eternal kingdom. It doesn't belong to these nations. Okay? And it will stand forever. Just as you saw that the stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in the pieces of iron the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. This dream is certain and its interpretation is sure. So Daniel is convinced that this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw and that God has given him the correct interpretation. So he tells the king, King, this is what you dreamed and my interpretation is correct, that God has shown you these nations that will arise after you. Okay? Now we're starting with Nebuchadnezzar and we're going to go down. Okay? So, how certain is Daniel's dream? Okay? So remember, Nebuchadnezzar, he starts reigning in about 605 BC. Okay? So that's kind of where we are, give or take a couple of years. So we're maybe in like 603, 602, probably somewhere in there when he has this dream. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom goes from 605 BC to 539 BC. Okay? And there is nothing like it. The centralization of power that Nebuchadnezzar is able to accomplish is unmatched. Okay? There's other kingdoms that will arise and spread out farther, but he has the most centralized government at this time. All right, now, the next kingdom that arises after him is the Medo-Persians. And this is actually two kingdoms who were in coalition with each other, the Medes and the Persians. Two arms of the same body. Okay? Medo-Persians arise in 539. They take down Babylon. Okay? And then they reign until about 331 BC. So a pretty long reign. Okay? Daniel tells them it takes over the whole body in the middle here and has two arms. So pretty stretching out for reaching here. And then the bronze is Greece. Greece comes after Medo-Persian, takes them down in 331 BC. And they become the superpower till about 146 BC. So again, a pretty long reign that we have for Greece here. And then after them, we have Rome. Rome takes down Greece as the superpower from 146 BC all the way to 476 AD. A very, very long reign for Rome. And Rome's power is divided between an east campaign and a west campaign. So literally you can start from Rome and their power goes out. Okay, so two legs. And then we have the feet. Okay? And this is where we are currently, in divided nations. Starting roughly about 476 AD to our present age. But, future. Okay? So anytime we see a prophecy, we know that it is a future and future. Okay? So Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar there's going to be a future and then there's going to be a future. We're not just talking about these days, we're talking about the latter days. And he makes that a point from the very beginning that he's talking about the latter days. Okay? Now, Daniel's pretty smart for a 17-year-old. Okay? He has studied, because he's part of the royal family, he has studied history. He has studied military tactics. He is pretty smart. So if it was just his interpretation, he could probably guess this one. He could probably guess that the Medo-Persians were going to come after Babylon. Okay, Babylon took down Assyria. Medo-Persians are right next door, that they were probably going to take down Babylon. The rest of these weren't even there. He had no way of knowing that Greece was going to come and take over Medo-Persia, or that Rome was going to then come and take down Greece, much less that then in the future we were going to have all these divided nations. Okay? There was no way for Daniel to know any of this. But look at these dates. We're talking something that happens 64 years from Daniel's timeline, something that happens 272 years later, something that happens 457 years later, and something that happens over 729 years later. There was no way for Daniel to know that this was going to happen. And yet he correctly interprets the vision of the statue in each of its part correctly, okay? And then, you know, if we were here, we would be kind of shaking in our boots, right? But then God gives us the book of Revelation. And he tells us through John exactly what's going to happen here. And this is what the entire book of Revelation is about, of what happens here, okay? Revelation 17 talks about a federation of 10 kings. How many toes does a normal person have? 10, okay? When Daniel tells him that the toes are visible on this statue, he is pointing out the number 10, okay? Now, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have to worry about these 10 kings because they're so far in the future, so it's not made prominent here. But in Revelation 17, the Lord tells John there's 10 kings, okay? Hearkening back to here, that these are going to be the 10 federations of kings that are going to arise in the last days, okay? There's also made a point here about the bronze being so strong that it breaks everything apart. And we're going to talk about that a little bit when we get back to Greece. Okay, so Greece absolutely obliterates everything that has gone before it. It is so strong and powerful that it just breaks everything up. All right, so we have this human representation to Nebuchadnezzar of what is getting ready to happen over the next 700 plus years. But this promise that in the end of it, that God is going to set up his eternal kingdom, okay? And this eternal kingdom is not going to be given to any particular country, okay? There will not be a king, a human king, who sets up over it. Like, God is the one who is doing this. God is the one who's setting up this eternal kingdom in the end, okay? It's also interesting that there is a de-evolution of materials. Did you notice that? So we start with gold, and then we move to silver, and then we move to bronze, and then we move to iron, and then we move to iron and clay. You will see a lot of people who said that our world is getting better, right? That we're evolving as a society. Well, in the view of God, we're not, right? So he's saying that where Nebuchadnezzar was and where Daniel was, though these kingdoms stretch out further, all he sees is this de-evolution of humanity until we're just clay and iron left. That isn't even we are barely holding it together, okay? Now, if Daniel were to look at our world today, he would probably be like, yeah, y'all are barely holding it together, okay? How many times are we on the brink of World War III? How many times are we on the brink of nuclear war, okay? They didn't have those things to worry about back then. We do, okay? So we are just iron and clay trying to keep it together, okay? So that's where we are. All right, so then in verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell down on his face and paid homage to Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar gets his dream, he gets his interpretation, he is told specifically everything, and he does not bow down to the king, to the God who gave Daniel the interpretation. He bows down to Daniel, right? And he commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him, Daniel. He is paying homage to Daniel as a god, okay? He's offering up incense to him and an offering in Daniel's name. He believes Daniel is the deity, okay? The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God, Daniel, is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Who revealed the mystery? God. Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't get it, okay? 48. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many gifts and made him ruler of the whole province of Babylon, We cannot even fathom how many people that was. That was a huge part of the kingdom, okay? And chief prefect over all of the wise men of Babylon. So remember all these wise men who Daniel just got off, right? He just saved their necks. He's now in charge of all of them, okay? And Daniel made a request of the king. So after all this happened, Daniel has one request. That the king appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. He turns the king down. He does not want to be in charge of the province of Babylon, but he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get my job. Why? Who was begging God for mercy with Daniel? They were in that room with him, begging God for mercy. And so Daniel wants to honor his friends. He says, give them the honor. Let them be in providence over the kingdom of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. Okay, so Daniel again is showing wisdom here. He has much more influence if he stays a part of the wise men of the court, because he can speak in the king's ear. If he goes out and is providence over the whole Babylon, he can make changes for his people, but he can't affect the king. Okay, so he asked for that position and to give Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego the affairs of the province of Babylon. Okay.
Are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego the same age as Daniel?
Yes. They're probably right roughly in the same age. They might not be exactly, but they're young people. So you're talking about the king just gave a bunch of teenagers the rule over all of his people. Yeah. So yeah, that becomes an important part later on. We're going to see that people were not happy about that. All right, so Daniel successfully gives a report. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar pays homage to Daniel, unfortunately, and we're going to see why God decides to use that to judge Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so these words in these last parts here are very important to what sets up in the next chapter. So in the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is going to make a golden image, okay? And we get the fiery furnace. And we are going to figure out that Nebuchadnezzar has not given up his pride. He even though he knows that his magicians are no good and they're false and they can't talk to the divine, he is still prideful and he still is not ready to bow down to the God of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Okay, so we still got to work on Nebuchadnezzar's heart here. Okay, but Daniel was spared. He was promoted to high office. Okay, his friends are now promoted, and everything's going good for Daniel. Okay, but we're going to find out that this act of the king is going to have repercussions on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're heading to the fiery furnace. Okay, we're heading towards why that happened. So this is very important that we focus on the events here. So what is our takeaway? What is our challenge to this? Prayer changes things. Okay, because Daniel and his friends are just living their life. They're asleep in their beds, and all of a sudden their world turns upside down because God speaks to Nebuchadnezzar in his dream. And because his wise men could not answer him, Daniel and his friends' lives are on the line. And they turn to God in prayer. And they ask and beg God for mercy to spare them and to spare everyone else. Okay? So prayer changes things. And we can also trust the God who has already seen history. Okay? He showed Nebuchadnezzar things that have not happened yet. Okay? He was showing him and giving him a glimpse of things that he would not see. And showing Daniel things that Daniel would not see. Okay? They don't live past here. They don't get to see the fulfillment of everything that has happened. We can look back and say, Daniel was right. God gave him the exact interpretation and exactly how history plays out hundreds of years before it actually happens. So we have a God who already knows history, and we can trust his plan. That he had a plan for each one of these kingdoms and why they came about. Okay? He had a plan for why Babylon took over Israel. He had a plan for why the Medo-Persians take on Babylon, and so on. He has a plan, and then right here we see Rome. Now Rome comes to power, and it brings the Greek language with it. So it takes this Greek language and Rome's building and roads, and we get Jesus. And we get the spread of the gospel. Okay? So every single part here, God aligns in order to get here, because here isn't the end for God. Here is the end for God. Okay? He knows that after all of this happens, and remember, this did not strike here. It didn't strike the head. It didn't strike the body. It didn't even strike the legs. It struck the feet. And the feet were so weakened by being clay and iron that that's what causes this whole thing to fall down. Okay? It absolutely crumbles into pieces, and then God sets up his eternal kingdom that takes over the whole earth. Okay? And Revelation tells us that God then gives his kingdom to his people. Okay? This happens by kings. Nebuchadnezzar comes, and the king of Medo-Persia comes, and the king of Greece comes, and the king of Rome comes, and then the 10 kings all come and fight. But God takes over the entire earth, and then he gives it to his people. Okay? Alright, so, questions about Nebuchadnezzar's vision? Questions? Concerns? Comments?
When you say God gives like the new kingdom to his people, are you referring to like when he makes like the new heaven and new earth?
Yes. So this is what he establishes, the new heaven and the new earth, and then he gives it to his people. So we then get to receive the blessings of that. Kind of like how Daniel was put in charge of Babylon, because the king gave him that responsibility. That's what God's going to do for us. So we don't have to overtake it. There's some theology that happened some years ago that said, if we're going to Christianize the world, we have to do it through war. Okay, the Zealots were really popular for that. That we have to fight and we have to take back the world. And God says, nope, don't worry about that. I've got a plan. And so he's telling us even from the beginning that he is going to be the one to establish it. No human hand touches this. Okay? No human hand sets up this. It's all from God. But then he blesses his people. Yeah, that's a good question.
I know, like, if you have a relationship with Jesus, like, that's nothing you should be afraid of. Like, God's taken care of. But I feel like it's so obvious that we're very, very, very close to that, that it's like I know I shouldn't be scared, but I don't know, like, how everything's gonna play out, I guess. And for that, I guess I'm nervous. And it makes me kind of, like, sad, because I know I have a lot of, like, friends and family who don't have a relationship with him. And it's, I don't know. Like, I think going about it, I don't want to seem like the crazy, oh my gosh, the world's ending, but it is.
Right.
Like, we don't know when or what time.
Right.
Like, it's very obvious, like, where we're at.
And when God gave King Nebuchadnezzar these, he didn't put the dates next to them.
No.
Right? He just knew what was going to happen next and what was going to happen next. We can look back and put a date on it, because we can see when each one of these kings come to power, each one of these nations come to power. But you're right, we're right here. We're in the most unstable part of it. But God is setting up for what's getting ready to happen for Revelation. Okay, so we know that we're somewhere near the end, but look at these different time frames. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't reign very long in comparison to Greece, who reigns for 200 years. So it's not exactly proportional. That's why he kind of uses a body that he could have just used kind of like the layers of a building, and he doesn't. He uses a body and kind of shows that it's unproportional. So we can't say exactly when things are going to happen, but we can say that God knows they're going to happen.
Right. And he gives us so many, like, signs and stuff.
Correct. Which is why in Revelation it goes more into depth about this time period. Okay, so John gets that revelation later on. Yeah. Daniel didn't even worry about it. He wasn't going to be there. John was writing to people, and he was saying, listen, this is coming. We need to be ready. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest difference. But he gives them this glimpse, and he tells them, these are the latter days. Okay? Not just what's going to come 100 years from now, but what's going to come 2,000 years from now. He makes that very clear in his revelation that this is not just history. This is what's going to happen at the end. Yeah. Gives him a little sneak peek.
Is there significance to the 10 toes? Do we?
It's going to be the 10 federations. So Revelation, that's why I said Revelation 17, if you read in there, it talks specifically about the 10 federations, and it names that there are going to be 10 federations of kings. But they don't last long because they're made out of iron and clay. They're very weak and they're barely holding it together. Yeah. That's why if you want to understand Revelation, you got to understand Daniel first. Because Daniel gives these little sneak peeks, and we're going to go into this. Daniel has a vision of this, and we're going to go very specific into each one of these, but he gives it to Nebuchadnezzar first, and Daniel interprets it, and then Daniel has a vision, and he already knows what all of this means, so God gives him even more. He said, I gave Nebuchadnezzar this, let me give you some more. Yeah.
When John writes down Revelation, does he know this?
Yes. He would have been a Hebrew, he would have known Daniel backwards and forwards, and that's why he was terrified, because he knew what it meant.
Yeah.
He knew that God was showing him what was going to happen here.
Because John would have been like Rome.
John's here, yeah. And then Jesus is giving him this.
Yes.
So John knows and he's seen everything that's happened, and he goes, uh-oh. And then God shows him this.
Yeah.
He said, it's coming. There's nothing in between here. This is what's coming. Yeah. But it's interesting because Daniel gives us this feet division. So he says the feet and then the toes. So it's made up of the same material, but we do see a division here as well. And there's a division between feet and toes. So toes is the latter days. So this is Revelation, and this is us. Yeah. So it's coming. We don't know when, but yeah, it's coming.
Wait, explain that again? The toes are destroyed though, yes?
Yes. But as we're going down, so as we're going through history, Daniel makes it a point, God makes it a point to say feet, and then he says toes. So he says later on, and the toes. So not just feet, as in like a boot and covering. He makes it a point to go, oh yeah, and don't forget, we got toes. And so that's the 10 federations of kings that happen in Revelation. So that's why I said we're here, and the prophecy makes it clear that we're in the feet. We're not to the toes yet. The toes are coming. How's that for a Sunday school quote? The toes are coming.
No, I
The
gotta
time of
go and do
toes.
some more research now.
The time of the toes is coming. We don't know when though. We don't know when. You know.
But it won't last long.
It's not gonna last long. No. Yep, it's not gonna last long at all. And it's going to be God who takes it down. And not any sort of war, not any sort of human intervention. It's gonna be God that takes it down. Yep. Alright, so kind of put this in your mind, because again, we're going to revisit this because Daniel gets a different version of this same interpretation. But it's going to be a lot more, so he's going to give him more layers to this vision. Okay?